So this one's really an extension of a bunch of other talks around schema drift. And this one, we'll talk a little bit about, just two examples of how we might be a little creative about conformed or schemas, consumer-driven schemas, right? So that's what we're going to talk about here. Pull it up here. So the issue we have is that we have a producer that makes a breaking change, or we made a bad decision in the past, right? The other one you'll see is, in this case, I'm going to pretend we made a bad decision in the past. Previously, we had a system that generated dates and times without any time zone info, and they were assumed to be in a specific region. Maybe they were in Hawaii time, because that's where our data setter is, I wish. And so we just timed everything there because we only had a single time zone for operations. It made everything easier. We had a raw schema that has that time zone in it, and we had a consumer-driven schema where we made a bunch of changes to make it, broke it out, and made it easier for the users. I don't really show that here because it becomes too complicated. At some point in time, we get a new producing system. Producing system generates it in UTC, or it generates it with a time zone markup, which is what we should have done in conform. We should have earmarked everything and conformed with a time zone or converted it, but we didn't. And so in this case, we actually, either way, we would have ended up with two different raw schemas, right? In theory, we could have done the right thing and conformed and then merged them back together and had merged both versions into the same conform, because this is the type of breaking change. It's a breaking change because consumers, even though it's still a date, we change the time zone or the markup for it. And anybody that made assumptions before is now broken. So what I said before was anytime we have we break people with schema change, guaranteed break with schema changes, we should put it in a different data set in the raw zone. And in this case, what we're going to do is I'm going to say that we should actually create a new conform zone done correctly. We got to keep the old one around because we might want it for some period of time. We have reports or other things that were built against it. We might need to go rerun those for old dates. And that data won't be updated, right? The data in the top conformed with the wrong time zone markup, we'll just keep it around for a while before we delete it. We'll generate a new conformed data set. We'll bring in the old data transformed correctly. Again, we don't change the raw zone. We never touch the ingested data. We need proof of what it looked like. And so in this case, we're going to convert it to the right UTC markup or with time zone markup. We're going to carry that into the conform zone on the bottom, and then we'll bring in any of the new data from the new system that did the right time zone thing. It'll come through the new raw zone, and we'll put that into the new conform, and we'll migrate all the consumers to the new conformed. Pretty straightforward. So this one's a little different. In this case, we had a cardinality change. Actually, I had a couple like this before. We're going to try a couple things in here. In this case, we had a couple options. I'm actually going to do two of them at once, which is really unfortunate. So we went from a customer type. You could be one single customer type, or you could be multiple customer types in the V2 version. So again, because we changed the cardinality and it's a breaking change in the producer model, right? We're going to work around trying to make it the same in the consumer model. In the producer model, which is the raw zone, we're going to end up with two different data sets, V1 and V2, one where the customer type. And this is because historically we've already got the V1 raw zone out there with the customer type as a cardinality of 1. And in this case, we're going to create a new raw zone with cardinality, multi-cardinality, and we'll start piling all the new data in it. Now, I actually think in a lot of cases, if we're smart, we're also going to have a version field, so we could do minor changes in data and people will kind of know what version was generated at any given time. Very few people do this. Let's pretend we're doing best practices and we actually kept the version numbers in the data like we do in messaging. Sometimes we'll tell you what version this payload is, right? And if we did that, we would have recorded the version number. So in this case, I have a version number, and it's partially for advisory for this, but it's also useful in other ways. So what we're going to do in this case is we're not going to create a new conform schema, because I think what we could do is we could actually make this conform schema still compatible with the old query up to a certain date, which I hate, but maybe that's good enough for here. And we can bring all the, because we went from a cardinality of 1 to a cardinality, arbitrary cardinality, what I did was we created the original customer type column, and then we created a new customer types column. And we put customer type V2 into customer types because they were stupid and they gave the column the same name for a different cardinality. I don't know why they did that, but it happens all the time. In this case, we're going to give that column a different name. And so customer type V2 cardinality, multiple cardinality, we're going to create a new column for that in the conformed. And we'll load the V2 data straight up, right? And what I decided to do here in this case is keep the individual customer type, and we're going to leave that thing blank. And then we're going to have the version number of 2. So we actually have an explanation why the customer type is blank, right? Because customer type blank could mean we didn't know the customer type. But in this case, it just means that we changed the cardinality. We don't want to pick the first one off the list because there's no notion probably that the first customer type is the most important. So in this case, we actually versioned it. When you get a row and you look at the row and you find out there's no customer type, you can say, hey, is this version 1? Oh, that means there's no customer type. Oh, it's version 2. That just means this field isn't set. There's no primary customer type, right? And so this is another example, I think, of how we can work a conformed. We can try and make it backward compatible for pre a certain date queries, but we can also make it forward compatible for all date queries with the new schema. Because in this case, going from single cardinality to multiple, we could actually fake that in the old data by creating a list of 1. So that's really all I wanted to talk about here were some different ways we might try and make the conformed work without breaking consumers. Again, in this case, we're going to break the consumers for new data, but their queries will still run for any data prior to the V2 date, and that might be okay in conformed. And that's all I got. I hope this was useful, and send me a note if you have some other ideas about this, as other people have done, and have a great day.